We have a few more people coming in, which is lovely. This is going to be recorded, so if you don't want to be recorded, we are muting everybody. So if you want to ask a question, use the chat box. I can see it clearly, and we can probably, depending on how we do this, at the end we'll ask our questions for Jay and Linda, and we'll see what happens. So do you want to get started?
Sure.
Okay,
Why the heck not?
let's go ahead and introduce Deb Beamer, the owner of the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop.
Greetings, and thank you so much for joining us. Thank you from the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop, located obviously in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, as the name says. I'm delighted that you're all joining us for another one of our fantastic Zoom virtual events. And I'm so delighted that Bill Peschel is willing to help us out with this again today. He does great podcasts for us. Those are pod and video casts. So if you don't want to just listen and you want to watch, it's a great deal that he's doing for us. And we always appreciate Bill's help. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the program over to Bill, and he'll explain a couple things to you and get on with the program. And thank you again for coming this afternoon.
All right, and thank you so much for coming to the Deadly Duo video and podcast event. I'm going to introduce our two guests. Our first guest is Canadian writer Jay Forman. She grew up the daughter of doctors, but decided that the only blood she wanted to see would be in print. She graduated from a university in Toronto with a radio and television degree, and became a producer for Canadian television. She always wanted to write mysteries and created Canadian travel writer Lee Smith, the daughter of a convicted serial killer, and her lover, the billionaire philanthropist Jack Hughes. Her story plays out over the course of 3 novels, One Way Ticket, No Return, and her current novel, Excess Baggage. So welcome, Jay Forman.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
You're very
welcome. And Deb.
Mm-hmm. Our second guest, you might say Linda Norlander, grew up around the printed word. Her father was a newspaper editor in rural Minnesota, and her mother wrote a weekly column for it. Linda chose a career in hospice and spent 30 years promoting improvements to end-of-life care. She wrote 2 books on the subject, one of which, To Comfort Always, A Nurse's Guide to End-of-Life Care, is still available. She also found time to write a novel or 2, short stories, even humor pieces, and one of them, titled Funeral Jello, not only won an award for humor writing, but was quoted in an academic paper. Although she lives in Tacoma, Washington with her husband, her heart is still in northern Minnesota, where she has set her Cabin by the Lake mysteries featuring freelance editor Jamie Forrest, the second one of which is Death of a Starling. So Linda, welcome to our bookstore.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mm-hmm. We want to talk first with Jay. I want to talk to you about your book, Excess Baggage. What can you tell us about Lee Smith, where she comes from, what she's doing, and where she's going?
My video's freezing. Lee was born in an area north of Toronto called Muskoka. It's sort of the cottage area. It's about 2.5, 3 hours, depending on where. And then her father went to jail for all these killings. And to protect her, her aunt and uncle, because the press was crazy about this thing, put her in a private school that's up there, a very posh private school, took all the money that they had to get her in. And that's where she met Jack, who was there. And she never really fit in that well because she wasn't of that world, shall we say. And then she decided to be a travel writer. And it seems that every time she goes on a trip, something strange happens. The first one is set in the school. So you get more of her background there. That's where the murders happen. The second one is set up in Webequie First Nation, which is about 500 kilometers. I can't remember what that is in miles, north of Thunder Bay. So it's way up there. It's closer to Hudson Bay than it is to Lake Superior. And she has some murders up there. And then this one, Excess Baggage, she's on a geocaching adventure with Jack in Newfoundland, primarily.
And the story arc actually encompasses her father's attempts to win an appeal of his convictions, And at the same time, Lee is dealing with her relationship with Jack over the 3 books. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So does this mean you have to read them in order?
You don't have to. I mean, if I've done it right, who knows, but I hope I did. They should stand alone. But if you want to know the whole story from beginning to where we are now, then yes, read them all, please.
Oh, yeah. Well, personally, I did not have a problem with that. I mean, I just got in on the 3rd book, Excess Baggage, and it was fairly clear. I didn't think, but I can always go back to the beginning as I will to find out how it all started. So it seemed to work very well.
Thank you.
In your second book, because the first book, as I understand, it concerns a murder at the school. The second book concerns the First Nation as well. What was that? What's that about?
It was actually, while I was doing some ancestry research, I discovered I had not a First Nation. She was actually from a Mohawk tribe in upstate New York during the American Revolution and moved up here. And that interested me. And then a friend of my son's was teaching up in Webequie, and her stories just fascinated me. And I thought, I'd want to know more. So she went back, she was here for the summer, and then she went back up to do the rest of the school year. And so I said, would you help me? Would you help me research this? And I learned so much about First Nations. It blew my mind. I mean, we're given a little bit of history in school, but nothing like this. So I thought, I know it's a mystery, it's supposed to be entertainment, but I have Lee going in there not knowing much and learning. And there's just so much we didn't know about, the residential school problems, the education problems, the running clear water, housing, medical care. I couldn't believe it. I was so stunned that this is still going on now. So I put it in there. Hopefully I didn't get too heavy with it. It was just Lee learning and saying some pretty stupid things when she was there, which is fine.
Well, that's the benefit of having a character who's kind of a neutral viewpoint. They can ask the questions and learn and be told what's whatever information you want to convey. You kind of see that a little bit in the 3rd book, which involves geocaching, which I've only heard about a little bit. Did you have to do, it involves Lee and Jack as part of a team building exercise for his company, going on geocaching, I don't know, expeditions, I guess it's a contest. What kind of research did you have to do for that?
I had read something about geocaching and I thought that sounds fascinating. It's like a treasure hunt, modern day one, even though the treasure isn't worth anything in most geocaching things. And so I was just walking around in Toronto, and there's an app you can get and it'll show you where the caches are. And I thought, there's hundreds of them. They're everywhere. So I thought, okay. And then Newfoundland, it sounded right to me. It felt right. So I hopped on a plane and went out to Newfoundland and again looked at this app. Lord, they're everywhere out here too. And so that's how that started. And I thought it'd be a good way to keep them moving from location to location. So they track these GPS coordinates and they find strange things.
It also kind of allows you to kind of have a travel log, because you're describing all these places that I'm not familiar with, and realizing how big like Newfoundland is compared to Great Britain. It's far larger, as I understand.
I didn't know most of that either. I mean, this is a learning experience for me, and just traipsing around, it was fascinating. And Newfoundland is gorgeous. If anyone's looking for a vacation, wow, is it a beautiful place.
What in particular impressed you about it?
The scenery, it's just, there's everything there, and the people are so friendly. Newfoundlanders are the best people in the world. I had an absolute blast, and everything that Lee did in there, I did to see what it was like. And it's just, when you're driving through, I haven't been to Gros Morne, which is significantly further north than where Lee goes. And that is supposed to be just stunning with fjords and hiking trails. And the only thing about driving in Newfoundland is you have to be careful of the moose.
I understand. I thought it was rather interesting. You have your billionaire businessman as Lee's lover, and how it's an interesting choice, because as part of the geocaching event, he's having to do things he doesn't normally do, like fly economy. Was there any kind of research as trying to depict what kind of a life someone on that level in that world is like? Is there something you're drawing upon for showing what he does and what he thinks?
like Lee, I was sent to a private school. And so I saw people like that who just had no clue. Their world has been so insulated, they just don't realize what it's like for 99% of the population. And I thought that was interesting to have Lee, who is just a perfectly normal person, but she connects with him in high school, and then the rest is history. But he's just led such a very different life than hers. So, I mean, most of it's imagination, but I just thought, what would it be like if you've never actually flown an economy? If you don't know what that's like, you know, the putting your stuff in the overhead bin, the back of the chair in front of you bumping your knees, all the normal stuff that we all go through. So that's where that came from.
And of course, Lee is having to adapt to his life as well. Are we going to see some more of that in future books?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, I mean, they'll continue. The next one's set out in the West Coast, which Linda knows well. So.
Mm-hmm. I enjoyed reading the blog posts on your website, and I would really encourage everyone to go ahead and look for it. I think it's jforman.ca.
Yes. Yeah.
You have a few posts, relatively few posts up there, like a dozen or so, but you talk about your family members, and you talk about your, I love the phrase you used for your life. You're a drama magnet. Not a drama queen, but a drama magnet, because I don't recall you're like actually a comic book store owner I used to know back in the 80s, where I would walk in on Fridays to pick up the comics, and I'd say, hey, Jack, what's up? And he would say, you don't believe what happened this week. He always had a story. But I think, as I understand, you endured an earthquake, you've had a lightning strike on your cabin, you've had a number of other things as well. How do you still stay alive?
I have no idea. I crash everything once, it seems. And actually, my son's friend is a pilot in the Air Force here. He's a helicopter pilot. And he just, when he was doing it, he said, I am never, ever letting you in my helicopter. Go have your helicopter crash somewhere else, get it out of your system, and then I'll take you up. So I'm not allowed in his helicopter. I don't know. Someone has said I was like the Canadian Forrest Gump. I just kind of mosey along and stuff happens. So it's bizarre.
Another aspect of your website is your family genealogy. And I am very, very jealous, because I know very little about my family except for the Moores who came over from Scotland in 1776. But you've had ancestors, if I understand right, released from the Tower of London after Anne Boleyn wrote to Cardinal Wolsey on his behalf. There were some other relatives as well. Is there any in particular that you particularly find amusing?
I like, well, the one that I really like, I think he was my great grandfather. I could be wrong on that. And he was at Cambridge, and he was on the rowing crew, and this is in the 1800s. And they won the race against Oxford. This is the story that's been passed down for generations. And the firstborn in every generation was given his silver mug that he was given for winning. And so it went to my mother, and then it came to me. And when I got it, I thought, I'd like to know more about this guy and look it up. So I was looking up, and I couldn't find anything about the race in 1844. So I contacted Cambridge and the college he was in. And I said, could you tell me more? And they said, we'd love to, but there wasn't a race in 1844. It was just a basic intramural race with another college at Cambridge. But the story he told, and it came to Canada, as he was just this great, they beat Oxford, and wasn't it amazing? And it was just nice to see there was another storyteller in the family. And then the Forman line, I found out just not that long ago that I'm illegitimate, not me personally, but way back when in the 1800s, Thomas and Rebecca married, and 11 years after Thomas died, Rebecca had my great grandfather and still named him Forman. And 11 years is a long time to be pregnant since your husband died. So who knows?
That is true. That is very, very true. I also noticed that you have playlists on your website, one for each of your books, that you link a whole series of them to YouTube, so people can follow along. How are they supposed to use that, or why did you compile these lists?
Music is very important to Lee, and it's one of the things she bonded with her father over. I mean, she hasn't talked to him in 20 years, but that was one of their connections when she was a teenager. So while throughout each story, she's listening to various songs. She's got a playlist for running, for working out in the gym, that kind of stuff. And I thought, well, why not put in the songs that she's listening to? So you get a little glimpse into what Lee's listening to. So it's on Spotify, and you can click on it on the website too.
Mhm.
And they're actually one of those songs, For No Return, I heard it on the radio. And I think it's the first one on the playlist, I'm not sure. And it's by a Canadian band, First Nations band called Midnight Shine. And it was Northern Man. And it just said perfectly what I wanted to capture for that book, for the people who live up there. It was just perfect. So I contacted them and said, hey, can I quote part of your song in my book? And they said, sure, go for it. So there's a line from the song in the book, and yeah, that's where that one came from.
Oh, it's very nice of them to do that. I understand authors are regularly cautioned never to do that because it's hard to get permission, first of all, and usually they ask for an inordinate amount of money. So good on you.
Yes.
I also understand from looking at your posts that you had a very notable encounter as a child with a Canadian novelist, Margaret Lawrence. It's kind of an inspirational story, although it really comes from, I still can't believe what I read. You want to, you had a creative language or creative arts teacher or a writing teacher, and you turned in an assignment. And what happened after that?
I was a teenager, and I'm sure, I don't know what it said because I don't have it, I burned it. But I'm sure it was loaded with teen angst. So, you've got to look at it from that angle. But she handed it back and said, 0%, these pages aren't even good enough to go on the roll beside my toilet. And that was a little upsetting. And it kind of killed the writing dream. But then just through a fluke, while I was still in her class, a group of us went out to interview Margaret Lawrence, who wrote a book called The Diviners, which at the time was very controversial. And I absolutely loved the book. So I was just in awe. I mean, she was a real writer, and she'd written this book, and it was so good. So I sat there just dumbstruck, couldn't speak. The other girls asked intelligent questions, and then we all stood up to go. And I hadn't said a word. And so she turned to me and she said, you haven't asked anything. Do you have a question? And I said, why do you write? And she said, only a writer would ask that question. And she sent the other girls out to the car, and we sat and talked for a bit. And she's the first person I ever told that I wanted to be a writer. And that I was being told that I couldn't write worth a darn. So she said, well, send me some if you want, and I'll look at it. Like, are you serious? And she said, yes. So I sent her some, and she was always incredibly supportive. She said I had stories to tell, to keep going, to ignore the English teacher. And she was just so nice. Unfortunately, she died, I think, 2 years later. But just a really nice person, very supportive and encouraging, which is something I've never forgotten.
Yeah, it's very, very important. Encounters like that can have, it can change your life, even though I understand it took a while for you to get to trust yourself and trust your gift to be able to do any of that.
Well, I had that same English teacher for another 2 years, so that didn't help any, but
I can see that would definitely a problem. But I think among the stories I've gathered from writers who have talked about being discouraged, I think that's near the top. That's at least the top 3, because that was just really amazingly horrible. But I'm glad you were able to get past that and be a productive writer as well.
Well, and the thing is too, when I was in university, my media writing professor constantly told me, you should be writing. You should not be in the control room. You should not be in the studio. You should be writing. And I thought, well, what does he know? He's some old fart of a professor. They never know anything. So I completely ignored him. And when my first book was published, I found him again. And I said, you may now say I told you so. And he did, quite loudly.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Linda, did you have any similar encounters with teachers trying to crush your dream?
Oh, fortunately not. I had some good encounters with teachers. I had one that probably influenced me more than anybody else. When he asked us to write an assignment to describe a mood without telling the reader what it was. And that kind of opened a whole new world to me about how do you use setting and how do you use the people around you to create the mood. So I was fortunate, Jay, that I did not have your toilet paper teacher.
Gave me a great story.
Yeah.
That's how it always seems in retrospect. You live through something horrible and then you realize, oh, I can tell people about this for the rest of my life. It almost makes up for it, almost. Linda, your protagonist of your books, Death of a Starling, and your first book, Death of an Editor, is Jamie Forrest, who, as I understand, is I'm making sure I want to say this correctly. Why don't you tell us about it, and then I won't get it wrong.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Fine. Jamie is I think she's probably about 32 or 33 years old. Actually, somebody once interviewed me and said, "What's her birth date?" And I thought, I don't know. She's a native New Yorker, New York City, grew up in New York City. The family had a family cabin in northern Minnesota that they would visit every summer up until the time that she was about 10 years old. Well, as an adult, she had a recent terrible experience in New York City where she was mistaken for a drug dealer named Jamie Forrester. And the drug task force broke into her apartment and hauled her out to the Queen's house of detention. And it was a very traumatic experience. And she decided, I'm done. I have to get out of New York City. I think I'm going to go to the cabin in the woods and live happily ever after. Well, she gets there and finds that she loves it up there, but making a living in the woods like that is always it can be difficult. And she thought that she could make a living as a freelance editor, and she's sort of eking things out, editing basically very bad novels.
I was very amused by the one you have in this particular book because it's a vampire romance that might charitably be called subpar. Please tell me you didn't quote from a real published book.
No, I did not. I did not. And that's been some of the fun of writing this series, is that in every book in the series, she's got an editing project. So, and this one is a vampire romance. In Death of an Editor, it was just a basic historical romance. And in the next book that will be coming out next year, it's going to be sci-fi fantasy. And just to warn the readers, they're all bad.
I hope that would be apparent to anybody who's reading the book. Fortunately, they have your prose to compare it with, so it's very easy to tell the difference, to say, oh, okay, this is the bad one. What is Death of a Starling about?
It's about in the first book, she meets a young man who is Native American. He's Ojibwe, who was involved, was injured in a school shooting in a small town north of where Jamie lives. And she decides that she wants to kind of explore the story of the school shooting because it got very little publicity, and all the people that were injured or died were Native American, and she was wondering if this was a hate crime. So she goes to this small town called Cascade and finds that nobody will talk with her about it. And that the whole community seems to be cloaked in silence, and that's sort of impetus for her to explore more and find out what is going on in this town.
It is fascinating to see her work her way through town. I come from a journalism background, so I'm watching her kind of cultivate sources, talking to people on the side, trying to put things together. And that's pretty much what she does throughout the book until it leads to obviously a climax on an island. And I wanted to say particularly, I thought that was extremely well done. The cat and don't want to say too much more, but the cat and mouse aspect of it was very well done. Is that based on a particular area that you're familiar with?
It's really a hybrid. As I said much earlier, I love the idea of the setting as a character. And everything is set in northern Minnesota, in my mind, very close to a area called the Boundary Waters Canoe Area, which is primitive, that you can only go in via canoe, no motorboats, no civilization in there. And the area that she lives in and explores is very near there. And the town of Cascade it's sort of based on small towns that are really struggling because of the economy. A town that was really there because of mining, and the mining operations closed. So trying to find their identity and their source of income.
Mm-hmm. Well, I understand you grew up in Traverse County, correct?
Yes.
Which is an area that looks like it's far different because it's one of the least populated county. It is the least populated county. I looked it up. It was less than 4,000 people, but it's also on the border with North and South Dakota, which seems like your father was the editor of the Weekly Gazette there, which is still publishing. What was it like growing up there? What was it? What did you see?
Well, the Traverse County, Wheaton, where I grew up, is very different than the setting for the Death of a Starling and Death of an Editor. It's really prairie, flat, farmland. And growing up in a small community like that, it was a situation where, you know, the kids that I went to school with in kindergarten, we went through, there were hardly ever any new kids in school. So we really knew each other. And the community, of course, knew everything. I mean, that's the life of a small community. And at least growing up there in the 50s, we kind of lived and died by what was good for the farmers, because it was a farming community. So if there was too much rain, everybody worried. If there wasn't enough rain, everybody worried.
Yeah. Did you like growing up there?
I did.
Mhm.
And I like the open spaces, which is kind of interesting because now I have Jamie in the woods, no open spaces. And of course, I live in the Pacific Northwest now with lots of trees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Your father was a newspaper editor for the Gazette. Did he also write? Did he write fiction?
No, I understand that he wrote a novel once, but I never read it. And it was one of those things that was probably tucked away in a closet someplace, and it's lost to the world. He, of course, as the editor, wrote a weekly column, which he called File and Forget.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the small town boosterism kind of thing. I pulled one up after I found out you were going to ask me about it, and looked up what he'd written about. And it was, you know, the duck hunting season is going to be good this year, and it's great that it rained, the crops are looking good, that kind of thing. And then he would throw in little pieces of humor. He was apparently talking about the baseball player Manny Alou, who had a brother, and I saw in his column he said, "Philippe Alou, you hoo, Manny Alou, your brother too."
That's when even on a weekly, you still have to fill the space by
You have to
deadline.
fill the space,
Just
yes.
do whatever you can.
Yep.
Have you read any of your mother's columns?
Yes. I went back to my mother died when I was 16. So she was only 50 when she died. And at that point, I wasn't paying much attention to what she was writing, but many years later, went back to the Historical Society and looked some of them up. She wrote a column called Over a Coffee Cup. And it was, in those days, it was sort of expected that the wife of the editor would write a woman's column. The recipes, the little household tips, those kinds of things. And that was not my mother at all. So I looked up one of her columns, and it was all about politics, which, was not the expectation in small town in those days.
That's very interesting. You wonder if it shows up in the letters columns for the next week. You always get somebody. We get that. We get a weekly newspaper as well in Hummels, out of Hummelstown, and we get it's a small town newspaper. Well, how did you move from that from growing up there into I know you went into hospice care. What exactly were you doing? It sounds like nurse, administrator, something in between.
I was both. I went into nursing and found that after a year of working in a hospital, that was not for me. I really like being out in the community. So I spent most of my nursing career either doing public health nursing out in the community, or working on hospice and end-of-life care, which I felt very passionate about. So I worked both out in the field and then also in administration, working on policy. How do we change the way that we care for people at the end of life, and what is our responsibility to do that? So it was something that I really loved doing. Although I do find it kind of ironic that I went from end of life care, I'm now retired, to murdering people in my books.
I'm just going to leave that there, not try to draw connections about that. Have you drawn from your experiences to inform your books?
I think so. I think Jay would probably concur with this, that when you write a story, you take bits and pieces of people you've met, situations you've known, and kind of craft it into the story. So I have particularly understanding life in small town, between growing up there and working in public health in a rural community. There are a lot of stories, and there's a lot of sense of place that you can put in your books.
Do you find yourself surprised by something that cropped up in one of your books that you thought, where did that come from? Or I didn't remember I wrote that. I didn't remember experiencing that until I wrote about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think Jay would probably concur with this too, that, you sit down to write and you have an idea, at least I do. I'm not somebody who outlines everything and then fills in the blank. I'll sit down and say, this is what I want to happen in this chapter. And something else happens, and it's sort of like, oh, I didn't know that. Or a new character pops in. I have a character now that I dearly love named Clarence, and Clarence is an 80-some-year-old lawyer. I had no idea that he was going to show up, and when he did, I thought, oh, he's a keeper.
That's always nice when that happens. That actually leads to a question about characters in general then. And Jay, if you want to go ahead and answer first, because my wife and I, we both write, and one day she turned to me and said, do your characters talk to you? And I went, what? They talk to me. And I said, no, we don't. What has been your experience, Jay?
It sounds strange, and my father was a psychiatrist, so he'd probably lock me up. But it's like I'm taking dictation sometimes, where you're just going along, and as Linda said, just suddenly, whoa, where'd that come from? And your characters surprise you. They'll take you where you were not expecting to go. So do I hear their voice? Yeah, I guess I do. I guess I hear their conversations. So
Okay.
yes, I'm crazy.
Yeah. Linda, you want to confess?
I absolutely agree that not only do these surprises happen, but yeah, the characters do talk to me. And sometimes I talk back and say, no, you didn't do that. Or sometimes I have a really good editor who says, no, this person wouldn't have done this.
I'm reminded of that was Vladimir Nabokov, who says, I do not listen to my characters. I treat them like galley slaves, and they will do what I tell them to do.
I like that.
That's a lot of fun. What is it about mysteries, Jay? What is it about mysteries that appeal to you?
I think it's more the people than the mystery. I mean, the mystery is good, but for me, it's the people. And I grew up like summers, rainy summer days, reading Agatha Christie and all the old greats, and I've always been hooked. I've just read a bazillion of them. Any new book that comes out from my favorite authors, I'm the first one in line to get it. And I like the way the humans, the people interact, and who's good, who's bad, that kind of stuff. That's what gets me.
Linda?
I always like the intrigue of trying to solve the mystery. Looking at the all the clues and the red herrings and all of that, and thinking, now, can I get ahead of the author? Can I figure this out before he or she tells us? So mysteries, going back to the days of reading Nancy Drew, I've always loved them. And I find when I read, I like to read really great literature, and then I always like it's like my guilty pleasures. Okay, I did that. I did my penance. I read that book. I read War and Peace. Now can I read a mystery
And have some fun.
and have some fun? Yeah.
Yep.
There are some very good books out there. Let's just ask, what have you been, is there anything you've been reading lately that you would want to recommend? Jay?
I don't really read when I'm writing, and I'm still finishing up number 4, but anything by Anne Cleeves, I love. Then there's a Canadian author, and it's not mystery, but Mary Lawson. I love her books, and she's just had a new one come out, so it's sitting on the top of the pile waiting for me. Yeah, and I think I'm more a British mystery person. There's just something about it. I guess it's the Canadian and the British roots and all that stuff. But that's the kind of stuff I like. And Louise Penny, of course.
Mm-hmm.
As I understand, in fact, you had an encounter where you asked her for advice as a fellow alumnus when she didn't know you, and she provided some very good advice.
She was just as nice as Margaret Lawrence. She didn't know me from a hole in the ground, and I was having a little bit of business issues and with my publisher, and I wasn't sure what to do. And I thought, well, it's worth a shot. So I sent her an email, and she replied and gave me great advice. I was very appreciative.
All right, Linda?
I just finished reading a book that we have a little free library that neighbors contribute to. And I pulled this one out thinking it was a spy novel. It's called A Gentleman in Moscow. And I thought, oh yeah, it's going to be like John le Carré, something like that. It wasn't at all. And I absolutely loved it. And now, of course, that you've asked me, I can't remember the name of the author, but it was one of those, it was slow at the beginning, but it just drew you in. And that's my recommendation for the moment.
That's very good. That just reminds me, I'm in the middle of reading a spy novel, Bassel's War by Stephen Carter. I just picked it up on someone's recommendation. I was like 90 pages in one gulp, which is not something I normally do, but it was that. It's a very odd book, a very odd paced book. Not your usual World War II spy novel, but it's certainly engaging me. I wanted to know how you come up with your characters' names, particularly, I guess your main character. Where did the come? I just interviewed Misty Simon, who is a cozy mystery author, and she actually was talking about her pen name. Gabby Allen. And I said, where did you come up with that? And her editor said that. And she said, well, I talk a lot, so I'm Gabby. And I decided I named it after my favorite author, Edgar Allan Poe, Gabby Allen.
Wow.
Yeah, Jay, where did you come up with Lee Smith?
It was starting the series, and I was talking to my agent. We were sort of bopping ideas back and forth, and he said he knew someone named Lee who was very nice, and it just resonated with me. I thought, okay, Lee, let's go with it. And then for the Smith, for some reason I always had the last name Sadler, which is her father's last name, in my mind, but I knew that she would change it. I thought, what's the most boring no-name last name? And it's Smith. So that's why she chose Smith to change her name to. And that's where she comes from.
Yeah, I like that. It's based on the character, not on what you're trying to do to say, I need a memorable name. I need to have Sherlock Holmes, need to have something like that. I like that. I like that.
And then for her physical, talking to a friend of mine, I said, I'm coming up with this new character and I'm trying to figure out. And my friend is, she always say, virtue. She likes to say she's 5 feet. She's not. And so she said, make her short, good looking, and athletic. And I went, okay. So that's how she looks the way she does.
Linda, where did you get Jamie Forrest from?
I knew ahead of time you were going to ask this question, and I have been pondering and pondering, and the truth is, I don't remember. I honestly do not remember why or how I came up with that name. Mm-hmm. I guess it was the character talking to me and saying, this is my name. I don't know.
And that's probably the best way to just leave it and just roll with it. I could see that. I can see that. Both of you have had some experience with writing groups, and I wondered if you had any thoughts or any advice about other people that want to go about that particular route. Linda?
I think the most important thing is to find a group that's compatible. That doesn't necessarily mean that we all write the same thing. I have a writers group where I'm doing mysteries. Another person is doing a nonfiction long book on war, and we've learned how to critique each other in a way that's both positive and useful. And I think that's really the key. Is writing groups could be deadly if it's the wrong combination of people. And I've been fortunate to find the right combination. And I found with writing groups that you learn not only from what they tell you when they're critiquing something, but you also learn a lot about writing from reading them and critiquing them.
All right, Jay, do you have any thoughts on the subject?
I absolutely couldn't agree more with what she said. I've had was in one group that was so competitive. It was, when the new person came in, they were the competition, let's crush them. But I also have some friends who are writers. Gloria Ferris, a Canadian mystery writer, is part of a group outside of Toronto. And I'm so jealous that she's found this group, that they're so supportive. And at the same time, I mean, not everything you write is going to be perfect. So, you need to hear, oh, that didn't work for me. You might want to look at that more. So I'm very jealous of her for having that one. But I've got friends who are writers, so it's not a group per se. But if you can find one that you fit in, and it's let's all help and support each other, great, go for it. It's just be careful when you're starting.
Very good, very, very good advice. I think the one thing you can also learn about is as you're explaining to other people what you think, you clarify in your own mind what's important to you in your writing. It's almost like it's a form of self-analysis as well. If you listen to yourself while you're talking, you understand. You have to make yourself clear that they understand it. And I think that can only help yourself, I guess. We might as well find out what is, can you tell us anything about your next book and when it's coming out? Jay?
The next one is called Wave Goodbye, and Lee and Jack go out to Tofino on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And there's some bad things happening out there, and it involves aliens and some marijuana and a few other strange things. And I'm not sure when it's coming out because I've been a bit delayed through some life stuff, getting it done. So I still have to finish it and get it off to the publisher. And then I'm thinking probably fall, maybe winter, it'll be coming out.
Okay, Linda, you want to tell us anything?
Yeah, the next one in the Cabin by the Lake series, each book takes place in a different season. So Death of an Editor was summer, Death of a Starling is fall. The next one is called Death of a Snow Ghost, and it will be coming out in May, and the season will be winter. And then there will be another one the year after that will take place in spring, so that I can bring you around to all the seasons in northern Minnesota.
Okay, and it sounds similar to what Craig Johnson does as well. So, you know, it's obviously endorsed. I want to also let people know where they want to reach you. I understand, Jay, you have your website at jforman.ca. Is there any other
Yes.
place you hang out at?
I'm on Facebook. Oh, you're going to ask me what that is, aren't you?
Can't help you there.
I think I'm at Jay Forman Author. I think that's where I am. So that's the two of them.
Okay, and Linda?
I have a website at lindanorlander.com, and also Facebook, and it's Author Linda Norlander, Facebook. And I have Twitter at Linda Norlander.
All right, and of course, we at the bookstore, we have all of our authors' books here. We have Excess Baggage, and we have Death of a Starling. We also have, I believe, signed book plates as well. And if you go back to the event page for Deadly Duo, which you could actually find through your search engine, there's little boxes at the bottom that can start the process of buying our authors' books. Jay Forman, I want to thank you so much for being here with us and talking about your books and talking about your life. And Linda Norlander, thank you so much. I enjoyed talking to you very, very much. And Deb, do you want to have any final words? Nope. Deb is fine. And so I want to say thank you very much for showing up.
Thank you very much for having us.
Mhm.
Really appreciate it. It's been fun.
All right. And bye-bye. And I hope your favorite book is your next book, or at least by one of our authors. Bye-bye.